Good day. My name is Anibor Kragha, and I'm the Executive Secretary of the African Refiners and Distributors Association, the only Pan-African downstream-focused association for Africa. And our role is to give a unified voice to all key stakeholders across the downstream value chain, which is not just refiners, but independent marketers, distributors, and regulators, and to facilitate investments across the entire downstream value chain. Today, I'm pleased to speak to you and give opening remarks for the Africa Energy Business Roundtable, which is holding on the sidelines of Sarah Week 2023. I wish I could be with you in Houston myself, but unfortunately I'm on my way to Cape Town, South Africa for my ARDA Week 2023 conference, which is holding next week. And ironically, the theme of our ARDA Week conference is balancing energy security and energy transition in the African downstream. Very relevant for us today. So let's talk about what's happening in Africa. When you look at the Africa Energy Outlook from the IEA that was done in 2019, it's clear that for Africa, despite what's going on elsewhere, energy demand is going to grow 45% between now and 2040. When you break down the primary energy mix for Africa, about 60% of that is going to be fossil fuels. Simultaneously, between now and 2040, 1 in 2 people born globally is going to be African. In fact, we're going to have about 30 cities with 5 million or more people in them by 2035. So we need to ensure that we have a clear path to transitioning to cleaner fuels as part of our energy transition agenda. Otherwise, we're going to have a major public health disaster on our hands due to air pollution. So what does that mean for us at ARDA and energy transition? Now, a lot has been said about what's going on globally, but I want to talk about the numbers, okay? When you look at cumulative carbon emissions to date, the biggest contributor has been Europe, the European Union, with 33%, followed by North America and Asia with 29% apiece. Africa in total has only contributed 2.73%. And when you back out North and South Africa, the remaining 48 countries have only contributed 0.54%. So when you're talking energy transition for Africa, I think instead of the carbon mitigation that's going elsewhere, since we're starting from such a low base, we should be talking carbon adaptation. Okay, what should we be doing to ensure that we can reduce the carbon footprints of existing production operations, and how to ensure that new operations are done in line with net zero? Here at ARDA, we actually have a 3-pronged strategy for addressing this. The first one is cleaner transport and cooking fuels for the reasons I gave earlier. Refinery upgrades to produce cleaner, lower sulfur fuels, storage and distribution infrastructure to ensure that we can deliver these fuels across the continent, and LPG for clean cooking to replace biomass as a cleaner cooking fuel. The second thing, of course, is renewable energies. We support biofuels, bio-LPG and the like. We're doing some processes around that. We also supply sustainable aviation fuel and hydrogen and so on and so forth. But we must also talk about power. What can be done in power on the continent to ensure that we have cleaner primary energy, primary generation sources, replacing coal with natural gas, and ensuring that we ensure that our transmission grids are actually upgraded. Okay. Now, but Africa fundamentally is going to be the biggest, in fact, sub-Saharan Africa is going to be the biggest, have the biggest demand for petroleum products in the world. It's going to be the largest importer by 2030. This is also by the IEA. Now, what does energy transition mean for us? Bottom line, we have to define on a decade by decade basis what we are going to be doing to deliver Africa's net zero emissions plan. And ARDA has come up with a decade by decade plan. Our first decade, between now and 2030, we believe we must focus on cleaner transport and cooking fuels, refinery upgrades, like I mentioned, storage and distribution, some renewables that's more mature and cost-effective, solar and the like, definitely in the mix. And as we move towards 2050, remember we're the 2.73% emitters, not the 29 or 33% emitters. We will now begin to adopt renewables technology as it becomes more cost-effective. So that's kind of what we're looking at. Essentially, what does it mean for refineries? Fundamentally, to get any investment in energy to begin with is tough, but in refining, even more so. However, refining and the downstream infrastructure does have a role to play in terms of carbon emissions reduction. In fact, when you look at the entire value chain, upstream, midstream, downstream, you'll see that about 33% of those emissions can be attributed to the downstream. When you look at things like refinery heat and power systems, hydrogen production, and fugitive emissions, if we address those, we will reduce about 33% of the emissions. Okay. Now, what we're looking at in refining is refineries of the future, where we try and go to zero transport fuels and focus on value addition via petrochemicals and cleaner fuels, and also focus on decarbonization projects. In fact, ARDA is actually working with Vitol and the SIR advising and the SIR refinery in Cote d'Ivoire on the first carbon abatement project in Africa. Okay, this was done as a financing initiative, as part of a financing work group that ARDA has that I lead. And the idea was essentially, how do we ensure that African refineries and the downstream later on can benefit from the carbon credits markets globally? So what we've done is essentially we took a look at the SIR refinery, and we've done a baseline emissions assessment. And what we've done is identify projects that will reduce the carbon emissions of the refinery. Ultimately, the next phase is to get those projects approved, secure the funding to do it, and ultimately try to generate carbon credits from that project. When you look at refineries, there's a lot of scope in refineries for emission reductions, whether it's scope 1, scope 2, or scope 3. Scope 1 around process and energy efficiency, scope 2 some renewable energy solutions, as well as hydrogen and low carbon feedstocks as well. Refineries can be part of the carbon emissions reduction process, and we are looking at decarbonization projects to do that. We know that any project financing going forward must have a carbon mitigation strategy involved. So ARDA is, like I said, starting with the SIR refinery, and the goal is to extend this to other refineries across the continent and ultimately generate our own African carbon credits trading platform and market that the African downstream and ARDA members contribute to. So what ARDA is doing in this decade by decade energy transition plan is to ensure that we have a finance plan that actually is in place such that investments can be made as and when required to deliver the necessary carbon emission reductions. ARDA has two key projects we're working on. The first one is a fund for refinery upgrades, storage and distribution projects, and carbon emission reductions, where we're working with our members to develop a portfolio of projects where we can actually start to execute to get cleaner fuels and reduce carbon emissions at the same time. ARDA did a study which was sponsored by NNPC Limited, Trafigura, and the Dangote Group on what it would cost to upgrade refineries across Africa to produce cleaner fuels. The total cost of that was about $15.7 billion, plus or minus 50%. But the idea is, let's start to have a real discussion about what it will be required to actually upgrade bankable refinery projects to deliver cleaner fuels. In addition, we have a second fund which is focused on LPG sector development. We're working with the Global LPG Partnership and one of our key sponsor banks on actually placing project financing to execute projects to deliver LPG for cleaner cooking across the continent, particularly because we believe that LPG as a replacement for biomass is one of the best near-term options for Africa to reduce its carbon footprint. So in summary, what we're doing, the key takeaways are: one, Africa's energy demand is growing, but we need to meet it with cleaner fuels. We need to ensure that we have a clear strategy for cleaner transport and cooking fuels, for renewables technology, and to ensure that we integrate power into the mix so we have cleaner primary energy sources for power. ARDA is working on two funds, one for refinery upgrades, storage and distribution infrastructure, and carbon emission reductions, and a second one for LPG sector development to ensure that our members and key stakeholders can get the funding that's required to deliver a net zero emission by 2050, or a target that works for us. Again, it's not a one-size-fits-all energy transition. In fact, given where we're starting from, given that we're the 2.73% emitters, we have a low base. In fact, I believe it's been said that if all of Africa developed all its natural gas projects, that number would go to about 3 or 3.5%. So we are working on carbon adaptation projects, not carbon mitigation, and we need financing to do that. So we need to get all the key stakeholders, the development finance institutions. We're talking to some of them now, particularly African Bank and Africa Finance Corporation, and the key EPCs, EPC firms, as well as off-takers and the like, to put an ecosystem in place that will allow us to get back structured project financing for bankable projects to deliver on a unique African energy transition roadmap that takes into account Africa's peculiar needs with growing population, growing energy demand, and ensure that we come up with a solution for Africa that gives us the best opportunities going forward. So with that, I would like to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today and wish everyone a very successful African Energy Business Roundtable on the sidelines of CERAWeek. Again, my name is Anibor Kragha, Executive Secretary of the African Refiners and Distributors Association, ARDA. I wish you very fruitful and extensive deliberations. Thank you.